The nurse told the resident physician I was confused and to ignore my complaints about pain. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting every medication error, every dismissive comment, every protocol violation for the past 4 days. When Dr. Richardson finally read the note I'd been clutching during morning rounds, his face went white. That single piece of paper would cost Sacred Heart Hospital its accreditation, cost Nurse Jennifer Morrison her career, and expose a pattern of elder abuse that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 72-year-old woman with a broken hip became the hospital's worst nightmare. My name is Margaret Louise Brennan, and before my hip fracture on October 3rd, 2024, I'd spent 40 years as a registered nurse. 25 of those years at Boston General Hospital, 15 at Massachusetts General. I'd worked trauma, ICU, surgical recovery, and end-of-life care. I knew every protocol, every medication interaction, every patient right, guaranteed by federal law. I'd trained hundreds of nurses, mentored dozens through their first years, and I'd testified as an expert witness in 4 medical malpractice cases. So when I say that what happened to me at Sacred Heart Regional Medical Center was criminal negligence, I don't use that term lightly. The fall happened on a Tuesday morning. Simple, really, tragically simple. I was trimming the hedge in my front yard in Newton, Massachusetts, standing on a step stool that I'd used 100 times before. The stool shifted on a patch of wet leaves, and I went down hard on my right side. The pain was immediate and unmistakable. I'd seen enough hip fractures to know exactly what had happened. My neighbor, Patricia Chen, heard me cry out and called 911 within minutes. The EMTs arrived at 9:47 a.m., had me stabilized and en route to Sacred Heart by 10:15 a.m. Sacred Heart was the closest hospital just 8 miles from my home. I'd never worked there, never even visited, but I knew its reputation. Solid community hospital, level 2 trauma center, generally good reviews. The ER staff was professional and efficient. Dr. Michael Foster, the orthopedic surgeon, examined me at 11:30 a.m. Fractured right femoral neck, he confirmed. We'll need to do a partial hip replacement. Surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. You'll be in good hands, Mrs. Brennan. I believed him. That was my first mistake. The surgery itself went well. I woke up in recovery at 9:30 a.m. on October 4th with the expected post-operative pain, manageable with the IV medications they were giving me. The recovery room nurse, an older woman named Dorothy, was excellent. Attentive professional, checking my vitals every 15 minutes, adjusting my pain medication proactively. You're doing great, Mrs. Brennan, she told me. Surgery was textbook perfect. Dr. Foster will check on you this afternoon, and you'll probably move to a regular room by evening. Everything changed when I was transferred to the orthopedic floor at 6 p.m. That's when I met Jennifer Morrison, 28 to 32 years old. Blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, wearing scrubs with cartoon characters that seemed deliberately chosen to appear friendly and approachable. But her eyes were cold when she looked at me. Another hip fracture, she said to the nursing assistant who'd wheeled me into room 412. Make sure the bed rails are up. These elderly patients get confused at night and try to get up alone. I'm not confused, I said clearly. And I'm a retired nurse. I understand all post-operative protocols. Jennifer's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course you do, sweetie. Everyone says that. Just rest now and let us take care of you, sweetie. I was 72 years old, with 4 decades of nursing experience, and this woman was calling me sweetie like I was a confused child. But I was tired from surgery, still groggy from anesthesia, and I told myself I was being oversensitive. Nurses were overworked and understaffed. Maybe she was just having a bad day. That evening, my pain level started increasing. By 8 p.m., it was a 7 out of 10. I pressed the call button. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes, 15. I pressed it again. Finally, at 8:23 p.m., Jennifer Morrison walked in looking annoyed. What do you need, Mrs. Brennan? My pain medication? It's been over 4 hours since my last dose. She glanced at my chart without much interest. You're scheduled for medication at 9 p.m. The order says every 4 hours is needed. It's been 4 hours and 20 minutes, Mrs. Brennan. I have 6 other patients on this floor. I can't come running every time someone has a little discomfort. Hip surgery is painful. That's normal. This isn't normal post-operative pain. Something feels wrong, she sighed dramatically. Let me guess. You're one of those patients who Googles everything and thinks they know more than the medical staff. I was a trauma nurse for 25 years at Boston General. Her expression shifted slightly, but the condescension remained. Well, things have changed a lot since your time. Modern pain management protocols are different now. We don't just hand out narcotics because someone asks for them. I'm not asking for narcotics. I'm asking for the medication ordered by my surgeon according to the prescribed schedule. I'll bring it when I get to it, she said, already heading toward the door. Try to be patient. She finally brought the medication at 9:15 p.m., 45 minutes late. But here's what made my nursing instincts kick into high alert. She didn't scan the barcode on my wristband. She didn't verify my identity verbally. She didn't check the medication against my chart in my presence. She just handed me a small paper cup with 2 pills and a larger cup of water. What medication is this? I asked. Your pain medication, she said impatiently. Specifically, what are the names and dosages? Mrs. Brennan, I have other patients waiting. Hospital policy requires you to inform patients about their medications. She rattled off quickly. 5 milligrams hydrocodone, 325 milligrams acetaminophen. Satisfied. I took the pills, but something felt off. After she left, I wrote down the time, the interaction, and my concerns in the small notebook I kept in my bedside table. Old habit from my nursing days. Document everything. By midnight, my pain was worse. Much worse. A 9 out of 10 radiating from my hip down my entire right leg. I pressed the call button repeatedly. No response. At 12:47 a.m., I finally heard footsteps. Jennifer Morrison appeared in my doorway looking furious. Mrs. Brennan, you cannot keep pressing that button every hour. Other patients need care too. I haven't been medicated since 9:15. The pain is severe. You received medication 3 hours ago. The next dose isn't due until 1 a.m. It's 12:47. That's close enough. And the pain suggests something might be wrong with the surgical site. There's nothing wrong, she said, her voice sharp. You're just drug-seeking. I've seen it 100 times. Older patients get hooked on pain meds and then make up symptoms to get more drug-seeking. I'd never been called that in my life. I'm experiencing severe post-operative pain that exceeds normal parameters. Jennifer crossed her arms. Mrs. Brennan, I'm going to note in your chart that you're exhibiting confused behavior and medication-seeking patterns. If you continue this way, we'll have to discuss it with Dr. Foster in the morning. Confused behavior. I was completely lucid, but I recognized what she was doing, creating a paper trail to justify her negligence, reframing my legitimate complaints as patient confusion and drug-seeking. It was a tactic I'd seen bad nurses use before. After she left, I began documenting in earnest. Time, exact quotes, my assessment of the situation. My hand was shaking from pain, but I wrote it all down. The next morning, October 5th, I heard Jennifer talking to someone in the hallway outside my room. It was around 7:30 a.m., just before the morning shift change. The patient in 412 is difficult, she was saying. Constantly complaining about pain, pressing the call button every hour. Classic drug-seeking behavior. She claims she used to be a nurse, but honestly, I think she's just confused and making things up. Has Dr. Foster seen her? A male voice asked. He will during rounds. I've documented everything. Confused, agitated, probable early dementia. You know how these elderly hip fracture patients get. My entire body went cold. She was lying to other staff members, building a false narrative about my mental state and behavior. This wasn't just negligence. This was deliberate. I need you to understand what Jennifer Morrison was doing, because it's important for what came next. She was engaging in a pattern of behavior that's more common in hospitals than most people realize. Elder patients, especially post-operative patients on pain medication, are easy targets. They can be dismissed as confused or dramatic. Their complaints can be reframed as medication seeking. Their concerns can be attributed to dementia or delirium. And once that narrative is established in the medical record, it becomes nearly impossible for the patient to be taken seriously. Jennifer Morrison had decided I was a problem patient, and she was going to make sure everyone else saw me that way too. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent 40 years navigating hospital politics, dealing with difficult colleagues and advocating for patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. I knew exactly how this game was played, and I knew how to win. October 5th, 8:30 a.m. Dr. Foster arrived for his post-operative check. Jennifer Morrison came in with him, standing slightly behind his right shoulder, her expression professionally concerned. "Good morning, Mrs. Brennan," Dr. Foster said warmly. "How are you feeling today?" Before I could answer, Jennifer interjected. "She's been quite confused and agitated since yesterday evening, Doctor, pressing the call button constantly, claiming her pain is unmanageable despite being medicated on schedule. I've documented several instances of medication-seeking behavior." Dr. Foster's expression shifted slightly. "Is that right, Mrs. Brennan?" I chose my words carefully. "Doctor, I've experienced severe pain that I believe exceeds normal post-operative parameters. I've also noticed that my medication schedule hasn't been followed precisely according to your orders." Jennifer made a soft sound. "Mrs. Brennan, we've discussed this. You receive medication every 4 hours. I received medication at 9:15 p.m. yesterday, 45 minutes late. The next dose didn't arrive until 1:30 a.m., more than 4 hours later." Dr. Foster looked at Jennifer. "Is that accurate?" She smiled smoothly. "Mrs. Brennan has been somewhat confused about time. The anesthesia can do that to older patients. All medications were administered according to schedule. It was a direct lie." And she said it with such confidence that I could see Dr. Foster beginning to believe her. "Doctor," I said firmly, "I'd like to request a review of my medication administration records for the past 24 hours. Specific times, not just check marks." "That's really not necessary," Jennifer said quickly. "I can assure you everything has been properly documented. I'd like the review anyway," I insisted, looking directly at Dr. Foster, as is my right under patient advocacy protocols. Dr. Foster looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm sure Nurse Morrison has been taking excellent care of you. But if you're experiencing severe pain, we should address that. Let me examine the surgical site." The examination took about 10 minutes. Everything looked normal. Good color, no signs of infection, incision healing well. Dr. Foster seemed satisfied. "Everything looks perfect," he said. "Some patients experience more post-operative pain than others. We can adjust your medication slightly if needed." "I'd appreciate that," I said. "And I'd still like that medication record review." Jennifer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll have the charge nurse pull those records for you, Mrs. Brennan. After they left, I knew Jennifer Morrison would be coming back. And I knew it wouldn't be pleasant. I was right." She returned an hour later with my medication records, slapping them down on my bedside table. "Here are your precious records," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Everything documented correctly. Just like I said. Maybe now you'll stop accusing the staff of negligence." I picked up the records and began reviewing them carefully, and there it was. The 9 p.m. dose was documented as administered at 9:12 p.m., not 9:15 p.m. The 1 a.m. dose was listed as 1 gax a.m., not 1:30 a.m. The times had been documented as scheduled, not as actually administered. "These times are incorrect," I said calmly. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying these documented times don't match the actual administration times." Jennifer leaned in close. "Mrs. Brennan, let me be very clear. You're a confused elderly woman recovering from major surgery. No one is going to believe your version of events over mine. I've been a nurse here for 6 years. I have an impeccable record. You're just another difficult patient who thinks the world revolves around them." She straightened up, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Now I suggest you rest and stop making trouble. Because if you continue this way, I'll have to document that you're experiencing post-operative delirium. And that goes in your permanent medical record." After she left, I sat there for a long moment, my hands shaking. Not from fear, from rage, because I recognized what was happening. Jennifer Morrison was engaged in something called defensive charting, documenting her version of events to protect herself from accountability. And she was weaponizing the medical record system against me. But I'd spent 40 years working in hospitals. I knew something Jennifer Morrison apparently didn't. The medication administration system at Sacred Heart, like most modern hospitals, was computerized. Every time a nurse scanned a patient's wristband and a medication barcode, the system recorded the exact time automatically. Jennifer could write whatever she wanted in the nursing notes, but the computer system would tell a different story. That afternoon, I asked to speak with the patient advocate. It took 3 hours and 2 more calls before Sandra Williams, the hospital's patient advocate, finally arrived at my room around 5 p.m. Mrs. Brennan, Sandra said warmly, I understand you've had some concerns about your care. Let's discuss them. I pulled out my notebook. I've been documenting several issues with my nursing care, specifically regarding medication administration timing and what I believe to be inaccurate documentation. Sandra listened politely while I explained the situation. When I finished, she smiled sympathetically. Mrs. Brennan, I can understand that recovering from surgery is difficult and frustrating. Sometimes the pain medication can affect our perception of time. I'm a retired nurse with 40 years of experience, 25 years at Boston General Hospital. My perception is accurate. Her smile faltered slightly. I see. Well, I'll certainly look into your concerns. I'd like you to pull the electronic medication administration records. The computer-generated timestamps, not just the nursing notes, Mrs. Brennan. I don't think that's necessary. I believe it is. Under the Patient Bill of Rights, I'm entitled to review all documentation related to my care. Sandra's professionalism was slipping. Mrs. Brennan, making accusations against nursing staff is a serious matter. I'm not making accusations. I'm requesting documentation that I'm legally entitled to access. She stood up abruptly. I'll discuss this with the nursing supervisor and get back to you. She never did. That evening, October 5th, my pain became unbearable. By 8 p.m., it was a 9 out of 10. I pressed the call button. No response. I pressed it again at 8:15 p.m., at 8:30 p.m., at 8:45 p.m. Finally, at 9:07 p.m., Jennifer Morrison appeared. What now, Mrs. Brennan? My pain medication is over an hour late. She glanced at her watch theatrically. It's 9:07. Your medication is scheduled for 9 p.m. I'm 7 minutes late. You need to learn patience. The order says every 4 hours is needed. It's been over 5 hours. You received medication at 4 p.m. I received medication at 4:45 p.m. and it's now 9:07. That's more than 4 hours. Jennifer's face hardened. You know what, Mrs. Brennan? I'm tired of your constant complaints. I'm tired of your accusations. I'm tired of you treating the staff like we're your personal servants. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to bring your medication when I'm good and ready. And if you press that call button one more time tonight, I'm going to document that you're experiencing severe post-operative delirium and recommend a psychiatric evaluation. A psychiatric evaluation. That's when I knew this had crossed a line from negligence into something far more sinister. After she finally brought the medication at 9:35 p.m., I made a decision. I wasn't going to take it because I needed to be completely clear-headed for what was coming next. I needed to be sharp, focused, and undeniably lucid. So I pretended to swallow the pills, then spit them into a tissue after Jennifer left. The pain was excruciating. All night long, waves of agony radiating from my hip. But I stayed awake, documenting everything, planning my next move. Because Jennifer Morrison had made a critical error, she'd threatened me with a psychiatric evaluation. That threat alone was grounds for a patient complaint, and it demonstrated a pattern of using medical authority to silence and intimidate a patient. By morning, October 6th, I had a plan. Morning rounds were scheduled for 8 a.m. Dr. Foster would be there. So would Jennifer Morrison. So would the medical residents, the physician's assistant, maybe even the chief of orthopedics if I was lucky. It would be my one chance to get everyone's attention simultaneously. I spent the early morning hours from 6 a.m. to 7:45 a.m. writing. My hand ached. My hips screamed with pain, but I wrote every detail I could remember from the past 3 days. Times, dates, exact quotes, medication discrepancies, protocol violations. I wrote about Jennifer's threats, her lies to other staff members, her falsification of nursing notes, and then I wrote about something else, something I'd been holding back, waiting for the right moment during my second night in the hospital. October 4th into October 5th, I'd witnessed Jennifer Morrison entering the room across from mine at 2:30 a.m. I couldn't sleep due to pain, so I'd been watching the hallway through my partially open door. I saw her go into room 410, where an elderly man named Mr. Patterson was recovering from a stroke. I heard him crying out, asking for water. I heard Jennifer's voice, sharp and dismissive. "You just had water an hour ago. Go back to sleep." But I knew from my nursing experience that stroke patients need frequent hydration. Denying water to a stroke patient was dangerous, potentially lethal. I documented that too. Time, date, exactly what I'd witnessed. At 7:50 a.m., I heard voices in the hallway. The rounding team was approaching. I folded my handwritten note carefully, creasing it into a small square that would fit in my palm. Then I waited. Dr. Foster entered first, followed by 2 residents, Jennifer Morrison, and to my surprise, Dr. Patricia Hammond, the chief of medicine. 6 people crowded into my small room. "Good morning, Mrs. Brennan," Dr. Foster said cheerfully. "How are we feeling today?" I looked directly at him, my expression serious. "Doctor, before you begin your examination, I need to give you something. It's important." I held out the folded note. Dr. Foster looked confused, but took it from my hand. "What's this?" "Documentation of systematic patient care failures and protocol violations that I've witnessed and experienced during my stay at this hospital." Jennifer Morrison's face went white. "Mrs. Brennan, this is inappropriate, doctor. Please read it before we continue," I said firmly. Dr. Foster unfolded the note, started reading. His expression changed, concerned, then alarmed, then shocked. He looked up at me, then at Jennifer, then back at the note. "Dr. Hammond," he said quietly, "I think you need to see this." He handed her the note. Dr. Hammond read it in complete silence. The room was so quiet. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. When Dr. Hammond finished reading, she looked at Jennifer Morrison with an expression I recognized from my own years in nursing. It was the look supervisors gave when they knew something terrible had happened and someone was about to lose their job. "Nurse Morrison," Dr. Hammond said coldly, "please step outside." Now Jennifer tried to maintain her composure. "Dr. Hammond, I can explain whatever Mrs. Brennan has written. She's been confused and difficult since admission. Out. Now." After Jennifer left, Dr. Hammond turned to me. "Mrs. Brennan, these are serious allegations. Medication timing discrepancies, falsified documentation, threats of psychiatric evaluation, and witnessed neglect of another patient. Are you certain about all of this?" "I'm absolutely certain, and I'm happy to provide testimony, dates, times, and specific details about every incident I've documented." Dr. Foster looked shaken. "Mrs. Brennan, you mentioned in your note that you're a retired nurse. Can you provide verification of that?" "I worked at Boston General Hospital from 1984 to 2009, Massachusetts General from 2009 to 2019. I specialized in trauma and critical care. I can provide contact information for my former supervisors, my nursing license number, and references from colleagues." The 2 residents were exchanging glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room. Dr. Hammond made a decision. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm going to have our Chief Nursing Officer, Elizabeth Santos, come speak with you immediately. We take patient care complaints very seriously at Sacred Heart. In the meantime, you'll be assigned a different nurse for the remainder of your stay." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I need to make something clear. This isn't just about my personal comfort. Based on what I've witnessed, there's a pattern of elder patient neglect on this floor. and it needs to be investigated thoroughly. After they left, I lay back against my pillows, exhausted but satisfied. I'd delivered the message. Now I had to wait to see if Sacred Heart Hospital would actually take it seriously. Elizabeth Santos arrived within an hour. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of the best nursing supervisors I'd worked with over the years. "Mrs. Brennan," she said, pulling up a chair beside my bed, "I've read your note. I've also reviewed your nursing credentials. Boston General and Mass General are excellent institutions. Your concerns carry significant weight." "Thank you," I said simply. "I need you to walk me through every incident you've documented with as much detail as you can provide. Times, dates, exact wording of conversations. Can you do that?" "I can. And I have written documentation in my personal notebook covering the past 3 days. For the next 2 hours, I recounted everything." Elizabeth took notes, asked clarifying questions, occasionally shaking her head in what appeared to be genuine dismay. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Brennan, I've been Chief Nursing Officer here for 12 years. I've dealt with difficult nurses, personality conflicts, and occasional lapses in protocol. But what you're describing is systematic negligence and patient intimidation. If even half of what you've documented is accurate, this is a crisis. It's all accurate," I said firmly. "Every word. I'm going to personally pull the Electronic Medication Administration records. The computer timestamps will verify your timeline. I'm also going to interview the other patients on this floor, particularly Mr. Patterson in room 410. And I'm going to review every patient complaint filed against Nurse Morrison in the past year." She looked at me directly. "Mrs. Brennan, if your allegations are substantiated, Jennifer Morrison will be terminated and reported to the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Nursing. Her license will likely be revoked. Do you understand the severity of what you're setting in motion?" "I understand completely," I said. "And I'm prepared to testify to everything I've witnessed and experienced." Elizabeth stood up. "You'll have a new nurse within the hour. Her name is Rachel Kim. She's one of our best. And Mrs. Brennan, thank you for speaking up. A lot of patients wouldn't have had the courage or the knowledge to fight back. After she left, I finally allowed myself to feel the pain I'd been suppressing all morning. My hip was on fire. My entire body ached. But I'd done what needed to be done. The new nurse, Rachel Kim, arrived at noon. She was everything Jennifer Morrison wasn't. Professional, attentive, genuinely caring. She introduced herself properly, verified my identity using correct protocol, and actually listened when I described my pain level. "Mrs. Brennan," she said after checking my vitals, "I'm going to advocate for a pain management consultation. Your current medication regimen isn't adequately controlling your post-operative pain. And that's not acceptable." "Thank you," I said, feeling tears prick my eyes for the first time since this ordeal began. By that evening, I had a new pain management plan, medication that actually worked. And for the first time in 3 days, I could rest comfortably. But the real story was just beginning. Over the next 48 hours, October 6th through October 8th, Sacred Heart Hospital conducted what Elizabeth Santos later described as the most thorough internal investigation in the hospital's history. They pulled every electronic medication record for every patient Jennifer Morrison had cared for in the past 6 months. They interviewed 23 current patients and 15 recently discharged patients. They reviewed security camera footage from the nursing stations. They examined every complaint filed against her, including several that had been dismissed as patient confusion or dissatisfaction. What they found was devastating. Jennifer Morrison had been systematically mistreating elderly patients for at least 18 months. The pattern was consistent. She targeted patients over 70, particularly those recovering from surgery or dealing with chronic conditions. She delayed medications, falsified documentation, dismissed pain complaints, and created false narratives of patient confusion to cover her negligence. Mr. Patterson, the stroke patient in room 410, confirmed my observations. "She refused me water multiple times," he told investigators. "When I complained, She told me I was being difficult and that she'd document me as uncooperative. A 76-year-old woman who'd been discharged 3 weeks earlier came forward after hearing about the investigation. "Jennifer Morrison told my daughter I was experiencing dementia," the woman said. "She convinced my family I needed memory care placement. But I wasn't confused at all. I was just in pain. And she wouldn't give me my medication on time." An 81-year-old man recovering from cardiac surgery reported that Jennifer had threatened him with restraints when he repeatedly pressed his call button for chest pain. "He documented me as agitated and combative," the man said. "But I was having angina, and she ignored it for 4 hours." The electronic records told an even darker story. Jennifer Morrison had been documenting medication administration times that didn't match the computer-generated timestamps, sometimes by 15 minutes, sometimes by 45 minutes, in some cases by over an hour. Every discrepancy followed the same pattern: medications documented as given on schedule, but actually administered late. Pain complaints documented as addressed, but actually dismissed. Patient concerns documented as confusion or attention-seeking, but actually legitimate medical issues. On October 8th, Elizabeth Santos came to my room with Dr. Hammond and the hospital's legal counsel. "A sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Porter, Mrs. Brennan," Elizabeth said. "I want to thank you for bringing this situation to our attention. Your documentation and testimony have been invaluable." "What did you find?" I asked. Rebecca Porter answered. "We found systematic patient care failures, falsification of medical records, and a pattern of elder patient abuse spanning approximately 18 months. Jennifer Morrison was terminated this morning. Her nursing license has been suspended pending investigation by the state board. And Sacred Heart is conducting a comprehensive review of all patients she cared for during her employment here." "How many patients were affected?" I asked. "At minimum, 37 patients experienced some form of negligence or mistreatment. Some cases are more severe than others, but the pattern is undeniable. I felt sick." 37 patients. 37 elderly people who'd been dismissed, ignored, mistreated, threatened. "Mrs. Brennan," Dr. Hammond said gently, "we owe you an apology. You came to us as a patient in need of care, and instead you were subjected to treatment that fell far below acceptable standards. On behalf of Sacred Heart Hospital, I am deeply sorry." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Rebecca Porter continued, "Mrs. Brennan, we'd like to discuss compensation for your experience. Medical expenses, pain and suffering, emotional distress. Our insurance carrier is prepared to make a substantial settlement offer." "I'm not interested in a settlement," I said quietly. The 3 women exchanged glances. "Mrs. Brennan," Rebecca said carefully, "I understand you might want to pursue legal action independently." "That's certainly your right. It's not about legal action," I said. "It's about making sure this never happens again." "To anyone, what do you mean?" Elizabeth asked. "I want Sacred Heart to implement a comprehensive elder care patient advocacy program. I want mandatory training for all nursing staff on recognizing and preventing elder abuse. I want a formal complaint system where patients can report concerns without fear of retaliation. And I want quarterly audits of medication administration records to identify patterns of delayed or missed medications." The 3 women stared at me. "That's," Dr. Hammond paused, "that's a significant systemic change. It's necessary," I said firmly. "Jennifer Morrison got away with this for 18 months because there were no checks and balances. Patients complained, but those complaints were dismissed as confusion or dissatisfaction. The system protected the abuser and silenced the victims." Rebecca Porter was taking notes. "Mrs. Brennan, what you're describing would require substantial financial investment and institutional commitment. Then Sacred Heart needs to decide if patient safety is worth that investment." There was a long silence. Finally, Dr. Hammond spoke. "You're right. We failed these patients. We failed you. And we need to do better. I'll take your proposal to the hospital board." After they left, I lay back against my pillows, exhausted but determined. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every elderly patient who'd been dismissed as confused, every complaint that had been ignored, every person who'd been made to feel like they were the problem when the system was failing them. On October 12th, I was discharged from Sacred Heart Hospital. My hip was healing well. The pain was manageable with appropriate medication. Rachel Kim, my new nurse, had been exemplary for the remainder of my stay as I was waiting for my daughter Susan to pick me up. Elizabeth Santos came to say goodbye. "Mrs. Brennan," she said, "I wanted you to know that the hospital board met yesterday. They've approved your proposal. Sacred Heart will be implementing the Elder Care Patient Advocacy Program, starting immediately. We're also establishing the Margaret Brennan Patient Safety Award, given annually to staff members who demonstrate exceptional commitment to patient advocacy." I felt tears in my eyes. "That's wonderful. Thank you." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "Thank you. You could have just sued us and walked away. Instead, you're helping us become better. That takes real courage." After she left, I sat in my wheelchair waiting for Susan, thinking about the past 8 days. The pain, the fear, the anger, but also the satisfaction of knowing I'd made a difference. My daughter Susan arrived at 2:01 p.m., her face concerned and anxious. "Mom," she said, hugging me carefully, "I can't believe what you went through. Why didn't you call me sooner?" "I needed to handle it myself," I told her. "And I needed to document everything properly before involving family." During the drive home to Newton, Susan kept glancing at me. "You're amazing, you know that? Taking on an entire hospital system." "I was just doing what needed to be done," I said. "Same thing I did for 40 years as a nurse, advocating for patients who can't advocate for themselves. But you were the patient this time, which made me uniquely positioned to see the system's failures." Over the next month, the story of what happened at Sacred Heart spread through the medical community. The Boston Globe ran an article titled, "Retired Nurse Exposes Elder Abuse at Local Hospital." The story was picked up by national news outlets. Medical journals wrote about the case as an example of systematic patient care failures. Jennifer Morrison's nursing license was permanently revoked on November 15, 2024. She also faced criminal charges for elderly abuse and falsification of medical records. Her trial was scheduled for March 2025, but more importantly, Sacred Heart Hospital's Elder Care Patient Advocacy Program became a model for other institutions. Within 6 months, 12 hospitals across Massachusetts had implemented similar programs. Within a year, it had spread to 43 hospitals in 6 states. The program included mandatory training on elder abuse recognition, an anonymous complaint system with third-party oversight, quarterly audits of medication administration records, and dedicated patient advocates specifically for patients over 65. On December 10, 2024, I received a letter from Dr. Hammond. "Dear Mrs. Brennan, I wanted to update you on the impact of the changes you inspired at Sacred Heart. In the 2 months since implementing the Elder Care Patient Advocacy Program, we have identified and addressed 14 cases of delayed medication administration, 6 cases of inadequate pain management, and 3 instances of dismissive or disrespectful communication with elderly patients. More importantly, we have seen a fundamental shift in our institutional culture. Nursing staff are more attentive to elder patients. Complaints are taken seriously and investigated promptly, and patients report feeling heard and respected in ways they didn't before. None of this would have happened without your courage in speaking up. You didn't just improve care at Sacred Heart. You started a movement that is changing how hospitals across the country treat their most vulnerable patients. Thank you. Sincerely, Dr. Patricia Hammond, Chief of Medicine, Sacred Heart Regional Medical Center. I kept that letter on my kitchen table for weeks, reading it whenever I felt discouraged about the state of healthcare in America. My hip healed completely over the following months. By February 2025, I was walking without assistance. By March, I was back to my normal activities, gardening, volunteering at the library, having lunch with my book club friends. But I also started doing something new. I began speaking at nursing conferences about elder patient advocacy. I told my story to rooms full of healthcare professionals, emphasizing the importance of listening to patients, following protocols, and creating systems that protect the vulnerable. At one conference in April 2025, a young nurse approached me afterward. She was maybe 26 years old, with nervous energy and earnest eyes. "Mrs. Brennan," she said, "I just want to thank you for sharing your story. I've been a nurse for 3 years, and sometimes the pressure to move fast and see more patients makes me forget to really listen. Your experience reminded me why I went into nursing in the first place." "What's your name?" I asked. "Amanda. Amanda Pierce." "Amanda," I said, taking her hand. "The best nurses are the ones who remember that every patient is someone's mother, someone's father, someone's loved one. Never forget that," she nodded, tears in her eyes. "I won't, I promise." In May 2025, I received a phone call from Rebecca Porter, the hospital's legal counsel. "Mrs. Brennan," she said, "I wanted to inform you that Jennifer Morrison pleaded guilty to 3 counts of elder abuse and 2 counts of falsifying medical records. She received a sentence of 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She'll never work in healthcare again. How do you feel about that?" Rebecca asked. I was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't feel victorious," I said finally. "I feel sad that it came to this. Jennifer Morrison had the education and the opportunity to be a good nurse. She chose to abuse her position instead. That's tragic for everyone involved." "You're very gracious," Rebecca said. "I'm a realist. Punishment doesn't erase what happened, but hopefully it prevents it from happening to others." In June 2025, 8 months after my hospitalization, Sacred Heart Hospital held a ceremony to officially launch the Margaret Brennan Patient Safety Award. They invited me to present the first award. I stood at the podium in the hospital's conference center, looking out at 200 faces. Doctors, nurses, administrators, patient advocates. Some I recognized from my time as a patient. Most I didn't. When I was admitted to Sacred Heart last October, I said I came as a patient in need of care. What I experienced instead was systematic neglect and abuse. But I was fortunate. I had 40 years of nursing experience. I knew my rights. I knew how to document. I knew how to fight back. I paused, letting that sink in. Most patients don't have those advantages. Most elderly patients trust that their nurses and doctors have their best interests at heart. When that trust is violated, when complaints are dismissed as confusion, when pain is ignored as attention-seeking, patients become victims twice over. First from the neglect itself, and second from the system that refuses to believe them. The room was completely silent. "The Margaret Brennan Patient Safety Award isn't about me," I continued. "It's about creating a culture where patient advocacy is valued above convenience, where speaking up for vulnerable patients is celebrated, not punished, where nurses like Rachel Kim, who treated me with dignity and respect, are recognized as the standard, not the exception." I looked directly at Elizabeth Santos, who was sitting in the front row. "This year's award goes to Rachel Kim for exemplifying the values that every healthcare professional should aspire to. Compassion, competence, and courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult." Rachel came to the stage, looking shocked and emotional. We hugged, and I whispered in her ear, "Thank you for showing me that good nurses still exist." After the ceremony, I was surrounded by people wanting to talk, to share their own stories, to thank me for speaking up. One woman, probably in her 80s, grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "My name is Dorothy Patterson," she said. "I'm Mr. Patterson's wife. The man who was in room 410 when you were there." "I remember," I said gently. "Because of you, my husband got the care he needed. Because of you, that nurse can't hurt anyone else. Because of you, this hospital is a safer place." Her voice broke. "Thank you for being brave enough to fight." "I wasn't brave," I told her. "I was just stubborn. And I had the knowledge to fight back. That's why this program matters, so that patients who don't have my background can still advocate for themselves safely. In August 2025, nearly a year after my hospitalization, I received an invitation that surprised me. The Massachusetts Board of Registration in Nursing wanted me to join their Patient Safety Advisory Committee. The committee's role was to review nursing complaints, identify systemic issues, and recommend policy changes at the state level. I accepted immediately. My first committee meeting was in September 2025. 12 people sat around a conference table, nursing administrators, patient advocates, legal experts, and me. The chair of the committee was Dr. Linda Martinez, a nursing professor at Boston University. "Mrs. Brennan," she said warmly, "we're honored to have you join us. Your experience at Sacred Heart has already changed how we think about elder patient care in Massachusetts. We are hoping your perspective will help us identify other systemic vulnerabilities." Over the next several months, I reviewed dozens of nursing complaint files. What I found was disturbing but not surprising. The pattern I'd experienced at Sacred Heart existed at hospitals across the state. Elder patients dismissed as confused, pain complaints ignored as attention-seeking, medication delays explained away as busy schedules. But now there was a framework for addressing it. The Elder Care Patient Advocacy Program that started at Sacred Heart was being adopted statewide. By December 2025, it was mandatory for all Massachusetts hospitals receiving state funding. The impact was measurable. Patient complaints about elder care decreased by 37%. Medication administration timing improved significantly. Most importantly, patients reported feeling heard and respected. In January 2026, 15 months after my hospitalization, I was invited to speak at the American Nurses Association National Conference in Chicago. The topic was patient advocacy and systematic change in healthcare. I stood on that stage looking at 3,000 nurses from across the country, and I told them my story. Not for sympathy, not for applause, but as a cautionary tale about what happens when systems prioritize efficiency over compassion, when complaints are dismissed rather than investigated, when vulnerable patients are seen as problems rather than people. Healthcare is built on trust, I said. Patients trust that we will listen to them, believe them, advocate for them. When we violate that trust, we don't just harm individual patients. We harm the entire foundation of medical care. I shared the specific changes that Sacred Heart had implemented. The anonymous complaint system, the quarterly audits, the dedicated elder patient advocates, the mandatory training on recognizing abuse. These aren't complicated solutions, I said. They don't require groundbreaking technology or massive budgets. They require commitment to putting patient safety above professional convenience. The response was overwhelming. After my presentation, I was approached by hospital administrators from 17 different states wanting to implement similar programs. Nursing schools wanted me to speak to their students about patient advocacy. Medical journals wanted to publish my first-hand account. But the moment that mattered most came from a young nurse who waited until everyone else had left. "Mrs. Brennan," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Last month, I witnessed another nurse being dismissive to an elderly patient. The patient kept complaining about chest pain, and the nurse documented it as anxiety and attention-seeking. But I remembered your story, so I advocated for that patient. I insisted on an EKG. She was having a heart attack. I felt chills run down my spine. You saved her life." The young nurse was crying now. "Because of your story, I knew to trust the patient instead of trusting the system. Thank you for teaching me that." We stood there in the empty conference hall, two nurses separated by 4 decades of experience, connected by the fundamental truth of our profession. Patients deserve to be heard, believed and protected. In March 2026, I received a letter from the Joint Commission, the organization that accredits hospitals nationwide. They wanted to develop a national elder care patient safety, a standard based on the program that started at Sacred Heart. They asked if I would serve as a consultant on the project. I accepted. For the next 6 months, I worked with a team of healthcare policy experts, patient advocates, and nursing professionals to develop comprehensive national standards for elder patient care. The standards included mandatory protocols for pain management, medication administration documentation, complaint investigation procedures, and staff training requirements. In September 2026, 2 years after my hospitalization at Sacred Heart, the Joint Commission announced the new elder care patient safety standards. Hospitals across the country would be required to implement these standards to maintain their accreditation. The announcement made national news. The New York Times ran an article titled, "How One Patient's Complaint Changed Hospital Care Nationwide." The article quoted Dr. Hammond from Sacred Heart. Margaret Brennan didn't just advocate for herself. She advocated for every vulnerable patient in America. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. In November 2026, I received a letter from the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP. They wanted to present me with their Andrus Award for Community Service, the organization's highest honor, recognizing individuals who've made significant contributions to society. The award ceremony was in Washington, D.C. In December 2026, my daughter Susan came with me, as did my 2 granddaughters, Emma and Sophie. They sat in the front row as I accepted the award from AARP's CEO. Margaret Brennan represents the power of one voice speaking truth to systems that have forgotten their purpose, the CEO said. She reminds us that age is not frailty, that experience is not confusion, and that patients have the right to be treated with dignity, regardless of their age or condition. In my acceptance speech, I talked about Eleanor Patterson, my late husband who died 5 years earlier. He always told me that the purpose of experience is to benefit others, I said. That knowledge without application is just trivia. What happened to me at Sacred Heart was terrible, but it would be truly tragic if nothing good came from it. I looked out at the audience, hundreds of faces representing millions of elderly Americans who depend on healthcare systems to treat them with respect. Every one of us will eventually be vulnerable, I said. Every one of us will eventually be the patient lying in that hospital bed, hoping someone will listen when we say we're in pain. The question is, what kind of healthcare system do we want to be there for us when that time comes? The answer, I believe, is a system that sees us as whole people, not just problems to manage. A system that trusts patients' self-reports rather than dismissing them as confusion. A system where nurses like Rachel Kim are the rule and nurses like Jennifer Morrison are stopped before they can cause harm. We've made progress, but there's still work to do. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached me with their own stories. A 78-year-old man whose pain complaints had been dismissed as drug-seeking until his daughter insisted on a scan that revealed a tumor. A 69-year-old woman who'd been told she was too demanding when she asked for help getting to the bathroom, resulting in a fall and additional injuries. An 82-year-old veteran whose complaints about breathing difficulty were attributed to anxiety until he went into respiratory failure. Story after story of patients dismissed, ignored, mistreated because they were old and the system didn't take them seriously. But they also shared stories of change, hospitals implementing new protocols, nurses advocating more actively for their patients, family members feeling empowered to speak up when something seemed wrong. The culture was shifting slowly but undeniably. In February 2027, nearly 2.5 years after my hospitalization, I received an invitation from the Institute of Medicine to participate in a national summit on patient safety and healthcare quality. The summit would bring together healthcare leaders, policymakers, and patient advocates to develop recommendations for improving patient care across all demographics. At 74 years old, I was the oldest participant at the 3-day summit in Baltimore, but I was also the one with the most recent first-hand experience of systematic care failures. During the opening panel, I was asked to share my perspective on what changes had been most effective since my experience at Sacred Heart. The most important change I said, has been cultural rather than procedural. Yes, we've implemented new protocols and documentation requirements. Yes, we've created complaint systems and advocacy programs. But the real transformation has been in how healthcare workers think about elderly patients. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Before, an elderly patient complaining about pain was often seen as just another difficult patient. Now there's an institutional expectation to investigate, to believe, to advocate. That shift in mindset has saved lives. A hospital administrator from Texas raised his hand, Mrs. Brennan. Some critics argue that these new protocols create additional burden on already overworked nursing staff. How do you respond to that? I looked at him directly. I respond by asking, what is the purpose of nursing? If we're so focused on efficiency that we sacrifice patient care, we've lost sight of our fundamental mission. Good nursing isn't about moving quickly through tasks. It's about recognizing when something is wrong and having the courage to address it. The room erupted in applause. That evening, during a reception, I was approached by a woman I hadn't seen in decades. "Margaret, is that you?" I turned around and found myself face to face with Dorothy Chen, my former nursing supervisor from Boston General Hospital. She was in her late 80s now, retired for 15 years, but her eyes still had that sharp intelligence I remembered. "Dorothy," I embraced her carefully. "What are you doing here?" She smiled. "I'm on the advisory board for the Institute of Medicine. When I saw your name on the participant list, I knew I had to come. Margaret, what you've accomplished is extraordinary. We found a quiet corner and talked for over an hour. Dorothy wanted to know every detail of what had happened at Sacred Heart, how I'd documented the negligence, how I'd found the courage to speak up when I was vulnerable and in pain. You taught me that," I told her. "Remember when I was a new nurse and that attending physician tried to blame me for his medication error? You told me to document everything and stand firm on the truth. That lesson saved me 35 years later." Dorothy's eyes were moist. "You were always one of the good ones, Margaret. Even as a young nurse, you understood that patient advocacy was sacred. We talked about the nurses we'd worked with over the years. Some who'd been excellent, truly dedicated to their patients. Others who'd been mediocre or worse. And we talked about the systems that enabled both types. The problem," Dorothy said, "isn't that bad nurses exist. The problem is when systems protect bad nurses instead of patients. That's what you exposed at Sacred Heart, and that's why your story matters so much." Before we parted, Dorothy told me something that has stayed with me ever since. "Margaret," she said, "in 45 years of nursing and nursing education, I trained thousands of nurses, but only a handful ever truly understood that nursing is advocacy first and tasks second. You were one of those handful, and what you've done since your hospitalization proves that good nurses never stop advocating, even when they're the ones in the bed." In June 2027, Sacred Heart Hospital invited me back for a special ceremony. They were dedicating a new patient care wing with enhanced elder care facilities, including private rooms with better visibility from nursing stations, advanced call systems with response time tracking, and dedicated family consultation areas. The wing was being named the Margaret Brennan Center for Patient Advocacy. I stood at the entrance with Dr. Hammond, Elizabeth Santos, and Rachel Kim as they unveiled the plaque. But what moved me most wasn't the plaque with my name. It was the inscription below it, dedicated to the principle that every patient deserves to be heard, believed, and treated with dignity. May this center serve as a reminder that the courage to speak truth can transform systems, and that patient advocacy is not just policy. It is purpose. During the dedication ceremony, several patients who'd been helped by the new elder care advocacy program shared their stories. A 76-year-old woman who'd had her pain properly managed after surgery. An 81-year-old man whose concerns about medication side effects were taken seriously and addressed. A 73-year-old woman whose family had been kept informed and involved in her care decisions. Each story was a small victory. Each story represented a patient who might have been dismissed, ignored, or mistreated under the old system. After the ceremony, I walked through the new wing. The rooms were spacious and well-designed. The nursing stations had clear sightlines to patient rooms. The call system displayed wait times and response rates on a public board, creating accountability through transparency. But the most important change wasn't physical. It was the attitude of the staff. Nurses introduced themselves to patients properly. They verified medications using correct protocols. They listened when patients expressed concerns. They advocated actively when something seemed wrong. That's what real change looks like, I thought. Not just new buildings and better equipment, but transformed culture and genuine commitment to patient care. As I prepared to leave, a young man in scrubs approached me. He was probably in his mid-20s, with a nervous energy that reminded me of myself as a new nurse decades ago. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, "I'm Marcus Thompson. I just started working here last month. I wanted to thank you for what you did. Because of you, I'm entering a profession that takes patient advocacy seriously. That matters to me. What made you decide to become a nurse?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "My grandmother was hospitalized 3 years ago." The nurse ignored her complaints about pain. By the time someone listened, she had developed complications that could have been prevented. She died 2 weeks later. I felt my heart clench. "I'm so sorry. When I heard about what happened to you and how you fought back," Marcus continued, "I decided I wanted to be the kind of nurse who listens, who believes patients, who advocates even when it's difficult. You showed me that one person can make a difference." We stood there in the gleaming new hallway of the Margaret Brennan Center for Patient Advocacy. Two people separated by 50 years, but connected by the fundamental belief that patients deserve better. "You're going to be a wonderful nurse," I told him. "Because you already understand what many nurses never learn, that our job isn't just to administer medications and complete tasks. Our job is to be the voice for people who feel voiceless." In October 2027, exactly 3 years after my hospitalization, I gave my final public speech on patient advocacy. It was at a symposium hosted by the Joint Commission, celebrating the 3rd anniversary of the National Elder Care Patient Safety Standards. "I'm 75 years old now," I began. 3 years ago, I was a patient experiencing systematic neglect at a hospital that should have protected me. Today, I stand before you in a healthcare landscape that has fundamentally changed. I shared the statistics. Elder patient complaints about pain management had decreased by 42% nationwide. Medication administration timing had improved dramatically across participating hospitals. Most importantly, patient satisfaction scores for individuals over 65 had increased significantly. But beyond the numbers, I said, is something harder to quantify. It's the shift in how healthcare workers think about elderly patients. It's the expectation that complaints will be taken seriously. It's the culture that values advocacy over expediency. I paused, looking out at the audience of healthcare professionals. When I was lying in that hospital bed 3 years ago, in excruciating pain, being dismissed as confused and difficult, I had a choice. I could accept the abuse silently, or I could fight back. I chose to fight, not just for myself, but for every vulnerable patient who comes after me. The change we've achieved didn't come from one person's complaint. It came from a system's willingness to acknowledge failure and commit to improvement. Sacred Heart Hospital could have defended Jennifer Morrison. They could have dismissed my concerns as those of a difficult patient. Instead, they investigated thoroughly, held people accountable, and implemented systematic changes. That's the model every healthcare institution should follow. Not perfection, but accountability. Not defensiveness, but openness to change. Not silencing complaints, but investigating them thoroughly. After the speech, I announced my retirement from public advocacy work. At 75, I wanted to spend more time with my family, my garden, my book club friends. I'd done what I set out to do. The systems were changed. The culture was shifting. The work would continue without me. But before I left the stage, I wanted to say one final thing. To every elderly patient who's been dismissed as confused, you're not confused. You're being failed by a system that doesn't take you seriously. Document everything. Speak up. Demand to be heard. You have that right. To every healthcare worker who witnesses neglect, you have an obligation to advocate. Silence makes you complicit. Speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. Your voice can save lives, and to every hospital administrator, patient safety must be your highest priority. Not efficiency, not cost containment, not protecting staff from complaints, but ensuring that every patient, regardless of age or condition, receives respectful, competent care. The applause was thunderous, but I was already thinking about home, about my daughter Susan and my granddaughters Emma and Sophie, about my garden that needed attention before winter, about the quiet life I'd earned after 3 years of fighting for systematic change. As I walked off that stage for the last time, I thought about Eleanor, my late husband. He'd always told me that the purpose of a life well lived is to leave the world slightly better than you found it. I think I did that, Eleanor, I whispered to myself. I think I did. Today, in 2028, I live quietly in Newton, Massachusetts. My hip has healed completely. I garden, I read, I spend time with family. I'm no longer giving speeches or serving on committees. That chapter of my life is closed, but occasionally I receive letters from patients who've been helped by the Elder Care Patient Advocacy Program, or from nurses who were inspired to speak up after hearing my story, or from hospital administrators sharing their success in implementing patient safety protocols. Each letter reminds me that what happened in room 412 at Sacred Heart Hospital in October 2024 mattered, that one patient's refusal to be silenced created ripples that spread across an entire healthcare system. Jennifer Morrison served her 18-month prison sentence and was released in early 2027. Her nursing license remains permanently revoked. I don't know what she's doing now, and I don't particularly care. My concern was never punishment. It was prevention. The real victory isn't that one bad nurse lost her license. It's that the system changed enough to prevent future Jennifer Morrisons from causing harm. It's that elderly patients are now treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. It's that healthcare workers understand patient advocacy as an essential responsibility, not an optional extra. Last month I received a letter that brought me to tears. It was from Marcus Thompson, the young nurse I'd met at Sacred Heart 3 years ago. He'd been working in elder care for 2 years now, and he wanted to tell me about a patient he'd advocated for, Mrs. Brennan. He wrote, "Last week I cared for an 80-year-old woman recovering from surgery. She kept complaining about pain that seemed excessive for her procedure. The attending physician dismissed it as normal post-operative discomfort. But I remembered what you taught me, trust the patient. So I pushed for additional imaging. She had a post-surgical hematoma that required immediate intervention. We caught it early because I listened to her instead of dismissing her concerns. I thought you should know that your legacy is saving lives every day. I keep that letter on my refrigerator, next to photos of my granddaughters and a newspaper clipping about the National Elder Care Patient Safety Standards. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about what happened to me at Sacred Heart. The answer is no. Anger is exhausting and ultimately unproductive. What I feel instead is satisfaction. Satisfaction that I turned a terrible experience into meaningful change. Satisfaction that I used my knowledge and experience to protect others. Satisfaction that I fought back when fighting back mattered. The nurse said I was confused and to ignore my pain. But I wasn't confused. I was being abused by a system that prioritized convenience over care. And when I finally got the chance to hand that note to Dr. Richardson during morning rounds, everything changed. Not just for me, for thousands of patients across the country who will never know my name, but will benefit from the systems I helped create. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not compensation, but knowing that the world is slightly safer, slightly more just, slightly more compassionate, because one elderly woman refused to be silenced. My name is Margaret Louise Brennan. I'm 75 years old. I was a nurse for 40 years and a patient advocate for 3 more, and I'm proud of both.